Sure. All right, good afternoon, and welcome to our last session here. My name is Craig Wood, and I'll be the moderator for you. Our presenter for this session is Jeff Hino of Oregon State University, and his presentation is entitled New Platform Plus a Digital Strategy Equals Extension Publications Redefined. Jeff?
Thank you. Well, thank you for coming out for the last session of the day. This is my last presentation I have to give, so hopefully have some fun with it. What I'm going to do is tell you a story, really, that sort of embraces some of the key issues I think that extension faces, and I think some very good thinking that's come from e-extension that made a direct impact on how we're looking at doing publications at Oregon State University Extension. So, there we go. Serendipity is a big part of this. A lot of stuff we try to think will come naturally from using logic models. Well, this falls way off of the chart as far as logic models. I could never have written this up as a sequence of logical events that would take place. Instead, it had a lot to do with some of the key ideas that have been looked at recently about how we can operate on the fringe, on the edge for creativity and let serendipity work. So it's all about one publication that really started this whole thing, the story I'm going to tell. This publication was a forestry publication that was basically a case study. There was going to be a series of case studies, 8 in mind by the authors, about forest management. Forests are those things in Oregon, pointy trees. It began like that, and I looked at it. We were going to do our normal PDF. But at that time, I had had a conversation with a person who actually works at the Harvard School of Business. And they were doing case studies. That's how Harvard teaches. And she showed me something called a multimedia case study. And I said, this is the coolest thing. We should do that. And maybe this forestry document would be a good place to experiment. So there began the story. Thanks to Harvard, I had a chance to look at many of their multimedia case studies, which integrated video and interactivity into educational case studies. So we started planning, trying to figure out how can we do this? So we filled whiteboard after whiteboard of kind of brainstorming. What would an interactive multimedia case study look like, and how could we build it? Well, we did build one. A mock-up anyway, working with one of the folks from our technology side on campus. We kind of sequestered ourselves for about 2 weeks and cranked out this multimedia case study. He did all the coding. It's all custom coded with video clips and everything. But that's about the time that we had to start selling this idea internally, this idea of a multimedia case study. And so we had to do a lot of talking and sharing. And we got all of our team at Extension and Experimentation Communications to kind of buy into this wild idea of a multimedia case study. But we needed some more horsepower, and we had to hire a multimedia programmer. And we found one. We found the right one. Because this particular programmer had had experience with some other pieces of software, and I had a cathartic moment. And that catharsis really came from the thinking of Jim Lancaster and Ann Adrian. Is Ann here? No. Okay. Well, I'll be throwing her name around a lot. Because I went to one of their workshops at ACE, and I was totally flummoxed. I didn't know what they were talking about for the first 5 minutes. And then it started sinking in. They were talking about using the idea of a platform to move yourself forward as an organization. And that's where I realized we were just trying to build a platform. And the idea of building your own software was really probably not the best idea. Instead, we started being strategic and came up with this model of a digital strategy for a new media platform. You'll recognize all the standard things we all deal with here. Every one of these is in response to a kind of demand from our audience. And we're trying to say, how can we provide all of those things? And this is where I realized that, again, from Ann and Jim, that the whole idea was about an ecosystem of tools. It wasn't about building our own thing. That's too much trouble. You end up with something that's wired together and only one person knows how it works. So instead, we wanted to follow these principles that fell right out of this kind of thinking, this platform thinking, and use that to guide us. And that's where we found, serendipitously, that we could use an existing tool that already was part of the ecosystem and not worry about creating our own and not worrying about if this is the answer forever. It won't be. But the idea that you select tools to constantly keep your system growing in capacity. So what we ended up looking at was a product from Adobe. Now Adobe was familiar to my newly hired multimedia programmer. And so he said, listen, we ought to be using the Adobe Publishing Suite, which is a high-powered authoring system that allows you to add interactivity to documents, customize these experiences, navigation, publishing it anywhere, because we're really trying to be publishing mobile. So this particular piece of software allows us to go to iOS, Android, and Windows apps. And it also has some analysis capacity in it. So we're going, this is the tool. This would be perfect. We'll use it. It kind of fits our ecosystem approach. And we started playing around with it, given that it was a free trial period for 30 days. Here's where the serendipity starts to come in. We took our publication about forestry and put it into DPS. And it turned out that Adobe heard about it. And they were very interested and actually came to see us. And after they saw what we were doing, they realized that much of what they publish with universities usually stops at the level of an alumni magazine or perhaps a student publication. But we were taking this software and creating learning materials, interactive learning materials with DPS. And they just went crazy. They thought this was really great. So they said, listen, they called us up after they had a meeting with us. We said goodbye, they walked away, and then they called us on the phone from their car about a half hour later and said, on their trip north to Portland, they said, this is too good. We have to see what these guys can do. So they said, listen, we're going to give you 6 months access to DPS, the full suite. See what you can do. We'd like to see this material. Of course, they were hoping to share it, too, as another way this product could be used. Now, understand that the enterprise version of DPS is $100,000 a year. Well, there's no way we're going to afford that. So, but we said, well, let's take this forward. Let's find out. We'll learn. Again, it's an ecosystem. We'll find something else if this doesn't work. We can't afford it. And that's where we ended up creating what I'm going to show you now. Oops. There we go. Bear with me. So our programmer we're working very hard with DPS, and Adobe was helping us as we kind of crossed new bridges and how to take this idea of an interactive scholarly publication and make it a truly, whoops. Falling out. Try that again. So this is the product. I'll give you a quick overview, then come back to what our challenges are. Alternative forest management. Basically, we have the ability to embed
Steve Fitzgerald.
video
I wanted to introduce you to an alternative
into this publication.
forest management series of case studies that we are following. Well, in Oregon,
So this is a
know
totally
lot from a scientific and
mobile-based
operations
application,
perspective about
just like the
how
magazines
to
you
do
you
that
get from
successfully. What we don't know
Omni
are some
or
of these
others that are really
alternative
high-end.
methods
That's what this
managing two-
can create. We can embed video anywhere. We can also do a lot of other multimedia in it. For example, look at this. Basically, we're right logged into Google Maps. So people can look and find out where this forest is. Again, video is a big part of this. But also, think of it as the idea of those words that might throw your audience that are embedded in your documents. We can add additional information with the little pop-ups. There could be photos, they could be videos. They could be just about anything. Again, the idea that interactivity is built right in. People can punch up different buttons on the timeline and see what these foresters did. Now here's the one we find very exciting. Part of forestry is understanding the structure of forests. Very difficult to do on a flat page. People want to know where the spacing is. What does the canopy look like? Let's take a look around. So I can basically navigate and I can say, well, how much an opening is above? So we've taken 360 photos of key spots in the forest. In addition, we can embed information that gives the viewer specifics about that particular stand and maybe the structure of that tree. Give you a little dizzying if you're not careful. Actually, we've done 2 of these, or working on our 3rd. We also have video that just floats out there. So it's like a little TV screen that's floating on a tree. And as you sweep by and you want to take a look at the video, you punch the video and it would play. It's a pop-up book. Keep them actively involved. How many people love pop-up books? I have one in my office. They're the greatest things. So again, the idea that this is a very powerful way to visualize information, present learning in an interactive form that we've not been able to do before, and present it on mobile devices of all kinds, colors, and shapes. So with that, though, we also realized that we could also do other things. For example, let me show you our Oip Magazine. We're very proud of the Oip Magazine. It's a color glossy photo heavy magazine that goes out for our ag experiment stations. We use DPS, again, to show what's possible to our faculty and to the university as a whole. Because believe it or not, our little shop was way out ahead of the entire university. We had a summit, we brought all these writers and publishers from the university to sit down and look at what we could do. And they're all amazed. But they had no way to kind of see the future. They weren't willing to kind of take a risk. So they're on this sort of, well, let's see what you can do. So we're showing them. Again, the idea that this is an interactive mobile magazine, but it also has capacity to embed all kinds of interactivity. If I want to take a look at a particular station, there it is. It also has media of all kinds. Videos can be placed in here, slideshows. For example, let me go to one. Here's a video. Again, all this is available on the internet, live through people's mobile devices. Looks like we're kind of a slow connection here. So I'm using all the standard magazine sweeping across my iPad. It's just beautiful, and it's fun to play with. And it's attractive, I think, for some key stakeholders. We take this to Salem, to our legislators, and say, look what our people are doing in ag experiment stations. You hand this to them, they're going to look. You hand them a piece of paper, they might just throw it. So this has, I think, real capacity to change how people react to our publications. Okay, so I'm running out of time, but I wanted to quickly, before I take questions, just sort of look at some of the issues we had to face in going down this new road. Oops. to create these things and others. Because, you know, really this idea of a new way of looking at things like this has affected our workflow. As you can imagine, we had to go back and rethink use not just about text. And it's not about text that just has some audiovisual added and slapped on afterwards. It really has to be integrated. All these new demands that we're getting from our audiences, think of the younger audiences, they want to see this kind of material. From extension. Yes, from extension. So how do you do that? Well, one way to think about it is when the author is actually writing, we use a thought experiment. On their typewriter are key pieces of media. They should be thinking at that level. When they're first building these concepts, when they're first writing, they should say, this concept needs a video. Otherwise, I have to write 20 paragraphs and it won't work. Or here's something that could use an interactive motion graphic. So we want to get our authors to put it at the core of their writing. It's not an easy thing to do. Our forestry people were really having a good time with this. So they were very, very helpful in seeing what works and what doesn't. The other thing is we have to think about this because the workflow is intense. We can't do this to everything. So our intake process has to be malleable to select proper candidates for this kind of treatment. We're not getting out of the PDF business by any stretch, or the print part. But we want to be able to offer these new kinds of publications. Managing the project is huge. Lots of our teams had to learn new skills. Our writers were shooting video. All kinds of things that required a new way of thinking about that. We had to manage our media, so we started using a tool we've been using for our magazines, but more for media. Extensis Portfolio is the tool we use. So our workflow really is helping us manage, I think, an entirely new process. We're learning, we're growing, and we're taking risks. And it feels really good. So at this point, I'm going to open it up for any questions.
In terms of delivery, do readers need any particular type of reading app, a Kindle, Nook, Kobo, sort of Adobe Digital Editions, DRM, Unpacker?
Nope. When we have yet to, the store is going to come online in probably a week or two. So it'll be just like you on any app. You go to the App Store. You go to the Apple App Store, and you can punch in Forest Management, and up will come our app. And you push it, install it, boom. You go to the other stores that for the other devices, same thing. So we're building also the capacity for a new business model because we can charge for these puppies.
Jeff,
Yes.
I have an online question that says, if you consider design, video, production, etc., do you have an estimated product cost for one just case study or one publication?
That's a good question. We probably haven't really done that because this was our first time around. We are finding in this series of, so far, 3 forestry videos, or forestry publications, they're moving along a lot faster. So I would guess, though, that I spent a good 3 weeks of working on video parts of it, and our programmer had to learn a lot about DPS and fight a lot of battles and learn things. So we're probably talking a good 6 months of time involving 2 or 3 people working pretty intensely on this one pub. But I think that's, like I say, has dropped considerably now that we know how to do it. By the way, speaking of how the money side of this, we could never afford $100,000. Guess what happened? Adobe saw this. They called us up and said, this is too amazing. We're giving you access for 3 years to Adobe DPS for $12,000 a year. That's $36,000 for 3 years. If we were doing that full price, it'd be $300,000 to access this. So all I'm saying is you can build relationships that use serendipity and our creativity to take you places you may not have imagined. It's all within the realm of possibility. So we're very excited about Adobe's friendship with us.
I don't know whether it's necessary, but is there a markup language you use underneath it so that you can export it to other types of platforms? Because archival issues are really critical. And if
Yeah.
it's platform specific, then you've got a problem.
Right, and I'm not the best person to answer that, and I couldn't bring Stephen Ward, our multimedia program, with us, but we've faced this issue and talked to a number of people who said, why would you go down that road after, even if 6 months or a year later we can't afford this? We know that we've learned a lot, and all this material will exist in a format that can be ported over. The Adobe Folio approach is being adopted by many others who are looking at trying to get into this market. Adobe has total stranglehold on it with the best product you can imagine at a very high price. But others are working on it, and open source people are looking at it. So I would think in 2 or 3 years, anything is possible. 3 years is an eternity in our digital age. So we decided not to worry. It's okay.
I'll just make one more comment. I suggest you also have a look at a product called CG Scholar that's run out of the University of Illinois. Does a lot of these things, and it's standards based. So it's a very emergent product, but they're running it out with an assess as you go capability in schools.
CG Scholar.
Yeah.
The letter C, the letter G, Scholar. Good. Because I'm really not saying you guys would be able to do this, but maybe your institution is using DPS, or you might try some other things, because I think we have to dive in.
Jeff,
Yes.
very exciting, but in terms of distribution, how did you go about it? As you know, we're from Australia. Our primary audience are going to be producers, growers with very poor bandwidth.
Mm-hmm.
What have you found in terms of distribution, and has infrastructure constraints come into play?
Good question, because the clients for our forestry piece are out in the forest, and there's not too good a Wi-Fi out there usually. So it can also be downloaded fully into your device. It just takes longer time to do that, so that you wouldn't have to rely on the Wi-Fi to provide the multimedia experience. But also, I should say, we're really anxious to find out more about usability as well, how the audience respond to this. Are the foresters going to get dizzy by looking at that 360? Or are they going to like the multimedia? So we're going to be coming back with some more information about it.
Jeff, we have another online question, and it says, I understand the ramp-up learning and cost, which sounds about $100K for this product. Where would you like to see the cost come down to make this more sustainable for lots of products?
Wow. Well, I mean, yeah. Free, if it was something open source, it's probably out there. And sure, I mean, we're not, the Madison Avenue folks are using DPS to make Wired magazine and put it online. So we're doing the same caliber of work as Wired. But that means, though, that we are also very lucky to be able to use that tool. But I think that the cost should come down, because this is where the world needs to go. This is where all the forces from our audiences are saying mobility, interactivity, social media, multimedia. We have to do it.
The pricing you're talking about is for the enterprise version,
Yes.
which would be for all users at your institution, I assume.
Correct.
Is the capability of that product different than if you buy the single user version?
Good question. Their business model is very complex for DPS. And, Adobe is not really well liked right now by higher ed. But the idea is, yes, you can buy it several different layers. The enterprise is the full tilt model for a big institution. You can buy it for your unit for about $50,000. And with that, you get a fixed number of basically what do they call them now? Subscriptions. Because people will just come on the app and say, oh, I want that Oip Magazine, or I want that forestry module. And you only maybe get 10,000 of those with your $50,000 license. After that, you have to start paying for additional.
So the limitations on the
Distribution.
not on the creative end.
Right. So again, we don't know yet how this is going to shake up our business model. I mean, people pay $1.99 all the time for magazines as good as OEP, if it, wired others, so maybe they would do the same for us. So we're exploring that. But yes, and there's also an individual level. I think it drops down to 30,000, but it's very limited and loses the features to be able to go to several different mobile platforms. And that's what we wanted to avoid. We didn't want to be just iPad.
The follow-up question from online. People 6 months salary benefits, hardware, facilities, they're not talking about voting costs, but actual personnel costs.
Oh, I'm really expensive.
Repeat the question.
Okay, they're asking what's the cost in terms of FTE, overhead, my desk, whatever. I don't know. If if you were renting out all of our services, what do the universities charge? It'd be a very difficult question to answer. The infrastructure is, of course, paid for by Oregonians, but again, all I can say is the labor is where we spent most of the money, and we already had the capacity for building these multimedia videos and other things. So it was just doing what we always do, but putting it in a new kind of animal. So I don't know if I can answer that. I need an economist.
Well, Jeff, thank you very much. It's very interesting, very engaging.